Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. Now, if you've never been here before, my name is Jakub, and I'm landscape photographer based in West Sussex, England. On the top of it, I also teach photography and editing using application called Luminar Neo. And if you're watching us here on our YouTube channel, you will know us through our or mine Luminar Neo tutorials. Anyway, today we are here to look at your photos, and that's what we're gonna do. So, first of all, what we're gonna do today, we're gonna look at your images, and while doing that, we're gonna look at three parts of your photo. We're gonna look at the technical part. This is where we look at things like your camera settings, brightness, exposure, noise, and all of that good things. Then we're going to look at the artistic parts. This is where we're going to look at things like composition, framing, main subject, and the overall storytelling of your photos. Finally, if we have extra time, and I think that it's beneficial for this photo, we also talk about photo editing. Now, for the photo editing part, we use application called Luminar Neo. Again, if you've been watching us here on our Clever Photographer channel, you know that that's the application we love and we use. However, if you do not have Luminar Neo, most of the editing can be done in any other current photo editing application. So this is what we're going to do. Now, if you want to join us in the future, what you can do is to join our membership called Clever Photographer Plus, where for a monthly fee, which I think is around $10 right now, you can join our membership and get access to our photography review show. You also get access to our Clever Photographer Academy, and most importantly, you will get our monthly digital photography bundle. Now, what do? We will basically get around 300 assets each month full of photography tools, things like presets for Lightroom and Luminar Neo, overlays, textures, backgrounds, custom brushes, brushes for Lightroom, and so much more. If that's something that interests you, then head to our website, cleverphotographer.com/forward membership, and find out more about it there. So today we have three photographers. We have a number of different photography styles. So let's go ahead and start right now. So first photographer we're going to be looking at is Elizabeth and her landscape photos. While we're here in the application, we're just going to take the image, make it a little bigger, and we're going to be talking about the camera settings and the technical part of the photo. So starting with this photo, captured with the Canon RP with the Tamron 28 to 300 millimeters. Looking at the camera settings for this specific image, ISO 640, captured with 44 millimeters, f13, and 1/640th of a second. So looking at it, the ISO a little bit higher for this type of photography. Looking at it, we're talking about daylight. Oh, let me make it a little bit bigger. Quite right, Zdeněk. There you go. So just so you can see the image a little bit bigger, here it is. Again, coming back to the photo, higher ISO around 640, which I think for this image specifically, when you have a daylight like this, I think you should try to keep it as low as possible to avoid adding any additional noise through your camera. So the goal is somewhere around ISO 100, again, to keep the digital noise to as little as possible. F13, for a scene like this, I would probably be fine even with just F9 or F7.1. Obviously, you want sharpness all the way through the image, but as there is no element directly in front of the camera or very close to the camera, you don't really need higher f-stop, as it would give you the sharpness anyway. So I think that by lowering the f-stop to somewhere around f7.1 or f9, you would then be able to also bring down the ISO and just work on that triangle of the ISO, shutter speed, f-stop. Looking at the shutter speed, 1/640th of a second, giving us nice exposure. Everything looks good. I quite like the clouds in the sky. I think they all captured nicely. So all of that works very well. So the only comment for the camera settings for this specific image for me would be the higher ISO, and keeping an eye on that to make sure that you don't get any additional noise. Looking at it, the sharpness is very good. Obviously, even with the water, with that shutter speed, we have that kind of nice frozen detail. However, because of the direction and the length, actually, the water looks quite good. It's not distracting. Now, the foreground here in the front doesn't really have many details. And in overall, I think I would probably just avoid it altogether if possible in the future. Just maybe frame it without it, but that's not really a problem at all. Again, the exposure is good. The texture in the sky is really nice. The only thing on the top of everything I would notice is a little bit of a sensor dust in the sky, which we can easily remove. In most of the application, there is some kind of erase tool. Like here in Luminar Neo, you can just move the image into editing module, go into the erase, and really what you can do, you can select the sensor dust, or you can use remove dust spots option. What it does, it basically scans the image, look for these spots, and then remove all of them in one go. So that's this image, and that's the technical part. Now, talking about composition. So lots of things right here. I really like the overall balance of the image. I think that works really well. I already mentioned that I'm not that crazy about this bit of foreground here. I don't think that necessarily add anything to the overall scene. So maybe in the future, I would try to avoid it and actually use the water as a foreground, if possible. Other than that, the layers works quite well. There's quite nice depth. I also like the framing. Again, using that 1/3 of a sky in the image can work really well by creating a balance. So all in all, I think it's really nicely done, and artistically, I think it gives you a really nice feeling, and yeah, it just works. There is a clear focal point of the mountain. I think the clouds and the fog can really help to add a little bit of emotion to it. So altogether, well done. Post-processing, I already show you how to remove the dust spots. Obviously, we could try to remove the foreground. Now, there is different ways how you can do that. Obviously, with the arrival of the generative fill tools, now this is a little bit easier than ever before. We can quickly try it by going into Gen Erase here in Luminar Neo, which basically is a similar tool to Photoshop and the generative fill there. What you do here, you basically use a brush, select specific part of the image, just like I'm doing here. And then once you have it selected, you can ask the application to erase it. What in most cases, not just in Luminar Neo, but other application, what they do, they basically take that specific part of the image. If it's a large area, they make it smaller and they send it to a server. The server then uses the AI learning, which usually is thousands and hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of photos. They look at the learning, and based on the surroundings and based on the area around, they try to replace it with the best possible result. Once they replace it, they send it back. The application then usually enlarge it and place it in that specific area. So we'll see how long this is going to take. Now, the speed of this often depends on the size of the area you selected, but it also depends on your internet speed and also how heavily is the server used. Now, we are already back, and actually it did pretty decent job. Now, we could do some adjustments to it and blend it a little bit further, but I think that the before and after in this case works quite well. So what we're going to do, we're going to click on save, get the result without the foreground, and bring it back into Luminar Neo where we can continue. So this was just very basic, quick adjustment. Now, I think if we do this and bring it in, we can see it a little bit clearer. I think it's a little bit cleaner without the foreground, and I think like this, it can work quite well too. Coming back to our images and the second image from Elizabeth, let's do that. Let's have a look at the second photo. Again, starting from the camera settings. Canon RP, Tamron 28 to 300 millimeters. From the camera settings, ISO 640, 300 millimeters, f13, and 1/640th of a second. Looking at it, I almost feel like we're looking at the same. So it's the same settings, just a different length or different lens length. So when you look at it, the first one, ISO 640, f13, 1/640th of a second. Second image, exactly the same, just 300 millimeters, where the first one is 44 millimeters. That's quite impressive. Now, looking at it, so I would pretty much repeat the same notes, higher ISO, which I would like to or try to adjust in the future to try to avoid the noise. When you zoom in here, let's have a look at the water. That's usually where the noise is visible, but I would assume that you already applied some noise reduction to it, so that's quite good. The sharpness, well, there is a slight motion blur. You can see it specifically on the areas here. You can see that it's not pinpoint sharp. It's what is sharp is the area here in foreground, and then there is just maybe a little bit of movement, which could be caused by simple wind or just a little touch. This often happens with this long lens, the 300 millimeters. There is just a slightest touch will be visible, and I think that's the case here. Other than that, I quite like it. So technically, I mean, it's evenly lit. The exposure is quite good. Yeah, the noise is under control. So really, mostly the sharpness and maybe just a little higher brightness than I would like. What would work really nicely on this image as a suggestion for the future would be maybe to try a little longer exposure. Now for that, in these conditions, you would need ND filter, probably quite dark ND filter, and maybe at least ND 1000, maybe even several of them, but then it could create quite nice effect of the smooth water going through. It would create a smooth foreground and it could be quite interesting. Anyway, so that's the technical part. Moving on to composition. Talking about the first image and then the second image, obviously it's more detailed. Again, there is a clear subject, which is the water coming through. That in overall create quite nice leading line. The fact that the area inside is quite bright and wide helps because it brings attention inside and it makes you to follow the river. So that works really well as well. I quite like, again, the overall balance of the photo, where if you would paint a line in the middle, it would kind of stay pretty much centered. It doesn't necessarily tilt one or the other. So that works really nicely too. So all in all, very good. Very good. I think artistically very nice. Post-processing wise or photo editing, as I mentioned, I would probably a little bit bring down the exposure. I think it's a little bit too bright for me. And I think another point of this image is the fact that everything is very evenly lit. So when you look at it, everything looks very almost flat because there's the same light everywhere. Then, okay, you have the center, you have a little bit of darker area here. But I think there is a way to help this. Probably the oldest technique how you could work with this is a vignette, where you can just basically close the image, make the edges darker, and then bring more attention towards the center. Another way to do this and work with the attention is to use Alt, Dodge, and Burn. So basically, what you do, you make certain areas of the image brighter and other parts darker. So in this case, we're gonna make the part of the image brighter, and then we use mask and brush, and we're just gonna brush over the areas where we want to add more attention. So let's say that it's the river and maybe also this part of the rock. In opposite, what you would do is you would make certain parts a little bit darker. So I think somewhere about minus 0.3. Again, into the brush, make it a little bit bigger, and then brush over the areas which you want to make darker. So maybe like the top and the sides here, and maybe also the foreground here. Now let's have a look at it before and after. And I think that works quite well. So Elizabeth, well done for your photos. If I would have to choose a winner between the two, I would probably go for this one. I think that's quite epic capture, beautiful with the clouds, with the light, with the texture, with the details. I think there's a lots of great things on this image, and I like it a lot. Now, moving forward, we're going to go to Zdeněk, who is actually in the chat. So I assume that he's watching live. Zdeněk, good evening to you, all the way to South Africa. I can't wait to see your images again today. So thank you very much for sending them over. So what do we have? We have one landscape capture right here, which I really like. That's great. A little bit of clouds, the leading line, the hill, or it's not a mountain really, but yeah, let's say that we're gonna call it mountain. There hiding under the tree works really well. The road now leading us towards it, the main tree here on the side, it looks great. I really like that. And also I quite like the light on it. It's not that, it's probably, I would assume that it's maybe a little later or earlier in the day, because it's not really that strong harsh light. I quite like the shadows here, so I think that works really well. Where the second image, what we're looking at is Kudu. That is really nice as well. Last week, if I managed to open it, Zdeněk actually shared with us a giraffe capture, which I loved, and also a lion or lioness here, which was incredible. So that was great. And again, we have another, where was I? Here. And another great capture here of this beautiful animal with lots of details and lots of great stuff. So we're going to start with the landscape captures, Zdeněk. What are we looking at? A Canon M6 with the 15 to 45 millimeters. Now, from the camera settings, nice and low ISO on 100, 15 millimeters. So kind of wider capture here, f7.1 and 1/200th of a second. So nice and low ISO, as I mentioned, right there. f7.1, my favorite. Anytime I don't have a really significant foreground element, f7.1 is my to-go f-stop. And 1/200th of a second, giving us really nice exposure. I think everything works and look very good here. So well done on that. Now, zooming in, noise-wise, I think everything is quite good. Just a touch, but nothing really significant. Then that's the noise. Sharpness is really good as well. Let's have a look. Obviously, it's a JPEG, so we will see a little bit of distortion, but I think the sharpness is very good too. Again, exposure, all the details, everything looks good from the technical part for me. Now, moving into the artistic part, talking about the composition and framing, I already told you, I think there is a lots of really good things about it. I think the overall composition and storytelling works really well here. This is almost like in a movie when you would kind of see the opening scene, you arriving on the road, there's the mountain at the back, which there could be something on the top of it, or there could be like a lost I don't know, world there. So it's really kind of nice opening. This tree here really helps with the depth. It almost creates kind of frame in frame for the mountain. I think the bushes around just really create a really nice flow into the image. Talking about the depth, again, the foreground, middle ground, background works really well. That addition of the sky with the clouds just really add something extra to the image. So all in all, I think this is super well done. And I think it works really well. I like the colors. I think it looks very natural, even though it's quite saturated. The details, the kind of pastel feel to it works really well. So it's not like extreme saturation. So all in all, this photo, I think works really, really well. I think it's really well done. Well done, Zdeněk. Great capture. Could we do something with the post-processing? We could try to add a little bit more attention towards the leading line or towards the path, again, by making it a little bit brighter, or maybe, just by dodge and burning in this area. So if we would take the image, different ways to do this. Obviously, there is a little bit of vignette there already, so we don't necessarily have to overdo it, but maybe what we do is just little develop tool with extra exposure, and then using something like the radial gradient, and then positioning it here could work quite well. I think what we need to do is maybe something like this, and then close it. So that can help a little bit for that. Anything else? Maybe a little bit of darkening of the foreground, but yeah, really not much to change or add, because I think the image works really well. Coming back to the catalog and going to the second image. So, Zdeněk, this one was captured with Canon 77D with the Canon 100 to 400 millimeters. From the camera settings here, ISO 1600, 400 millimeters, f9, and 1/1000th of a second. So, higher ISO, but for the wildlife, obviously, you want to make sure that with the shutter speed, you're getting all the details. So that's fine. I think in that case, you're really more going for details and sharpness than worrying about the noise later. So I think that's quite cool. Now, quickly jumping into the comments, Zdeněk mentioned that for the wildlife, he used automatic ISO because he doesn't have a time for adjustments when he's lucky to see an animal. And I completely agree. Recently, I went for a trip to photograph puffins, and it was the same idea. Basically, you set up your camera, and then you just kind of really tracking the bird. You don't have a time to play around with it. You have some kind of basic settings, but I think the automatic ISO is a great option for this type of photography, and it can work really well clearly, because my first look at it, It's there is no like this crazy noise there. I think you have lots of lovely details, and I think it works really well. So I think in overall that is all good. I quite like that. mm, Yes, bokeh and soft background, but it's not crazy. You can still recognize the background, which I think works really well. So it's soft enough to not create a distraction, but it's not crazy blurry. So then you can't see anything. So I think that works really, really well. I quite enjoy the light from the side because that creates a really nice portrait. That's almost like a Rembrandt look, which is quite cool. I quite like that. I think that creates a really nice image. And I think it works really well. Again, the post processing is really nicely done, very gentle, natural colors, right brightness, right saturation, lovely sharpness. I think it works really, really well. I mean, to me, similarly to the last image with the lionesses, you could try to apply this kind of black and white to it to create almost like a fine art, uh, like a dark look. So, for example, we could actually copy this and try to apply it to this image, see what we would get. But I think the image itself works really well and you wouldn't have to apply it. But if we would want something like this, before, if we can see, maybe we need to go into the edit module. But I think the black and white can actually works really nicely here too. Let's have a look. Before and after. We could go even stronger on some of the adjustments, really make this part darker to make that Rembrandt look even more stronger. So let's say something like this, and then the linear gradient like this. And then when you close it, you can see that. So maybe something like this. And then with the brush, really jump in and highlights just some of the areas. So let's say we do this and we go into the brush. This, and then we're just gonna brush over the areas we want to make a little bit brighter, like here, and maybe the nose and here. And again, let's have a look at it before and after. So this is very much a creative thinking rather than anything wrong with your photo. It's just kind of playing around and seeing what else you could get out of this incredible capture. So Zdeněk, well done. That's a great image. Both of them actually are great images. So thank you so much for sending them over. And finally, we're going to go to some nature photos from Tony. Tony, what do we have? Some beautiful flowers captured in different spaces. And then we also have this very dramatic or moody capture. So let's start with that. Unusually, for Tony, this is a capture captured with the Canon 7D with the 18 to 135 millimeters. Now, from the camera settings on this one, ISO 400, 18 millimeters, f19, and 1/250th of a second. So, ISO 400. Okay, well, there is a movement of the bird, so I would assume that you would probably need a faster shutter speed to capture them sharp. However, the f19, I don't necessarily see a reason here for the f19 because I think even at f11 or f13, you will probably get sharpness all the way through anyway. And by bringing the f-stop down again, you would then be able to bring down the ISO and remove a little bit of that noise, which is quite visible in the sky. So that would be my suggestion there. Otherwise, when we bring it to the artistic part, I think it works really well, actually. It's very moody. It's very, how you say, moody is the right word. It's very cinematic, almost like a horror capture. And I think it works really well. Yeah, it's very artistic. What else could I say? When it comes to post processing, you could play around a little bit with the shade of the blue to make or add a different feel to it. So the easiest way to do this is to jump into the edit tool, go into the color tool, and in color tool, open the HSL panel and really just play around with the blue and see what works for you. You could add or remove the saturation of the blue. You could make it a little bit less saturated to make it more washed out, or you could make it much more saturated. Really up to you. And finally, of course, to finish it off, in the luminance, you can make the blue much darker or much brighter if you would want to create even more contrast between the silhouette like trees and the sky. So yeah, that's what you could do with that. So Very well done, Tori. Thank you very much for sending this one over. That was great to see something a little bit different. And yeah, here are just few notes to see if there are maybe things you could do a little bit differently. Moving to your nature captures or flower captures, let's have a look at few. Just kind of clicking through, they were all captured with the Canon 7D 18 to 135 millimeters. Just probably the one. So in overall, I told you in the past, I really enjoy the square crop. I think that can work really well. What I also enjoy is the work with depth on your images. The fact that most of the time the subject is all in focus, and then you have a really nice bokeh style effect at the back. I also think that you have a very good eye for contrast. So often you have the kind of main subject and the main act of the image. For example, here, the kind of bright pink in contrast with the darker green. I think that works really well too. Again, here, I think it works nicely too. You have that kind of purple on a dark background with a little bit of a green. All of this works really, really well together. So well done there. Now, in overall sharpness, let's have a look at it. Let's, for example, have a look at this image. From the camera settings on this one, ISO 250 with f7.1 and 1/250th of a second. So nice and low ISO. Again, depending on the light situation, maybe needed. Looking at it closer, there's no problem with noise, so all of that is good. F7.1 with 85 millimeters. Again, giving you nice detail on both of the main flowers and quite nice soft background, which gives us a great depth and great overall feel. I quite like the level of details, the kind of texture, especially right here. I think that looks really, really nicely, and it works really well together. So details good, no noise. I like the light. I quite like that kind of diffuse light, which giving us quite nice light from the top, but it gives us the darker areas at the bottom, creating a little bit of a contrast, but natural contrast. So again, I think that works nicely too. When it comes to the composition, I really enjoy this. So we have 3 flowers, which works really well in composition, 1, 2, and 3, creating very nice balanced composition. Again, the framing with the opening of this flower and then going to the smaller can work really well. The contrast between the colors works really well. The contrast between the luminance of the background and the foreground works really well. It just, when you look at it, you immediately know what you're looking at. It gets the right attraction, the right details, so it works really, really well. So well done, Tony. Post-processing wise, again, I really like it. I like the pastel natural colors, not too much of a saturation, gentle adjustments. I just think that it works very well. So well done. So Tony, well done on your images. I love them. Well done on trying to do something a little bit different, playing around. I think that can work really well as well. So altogether, thank you again for sending your images over. It was great to review them. And that goes to Zdeněk and Elizabeth as well. Thank you for sending your photos over. And for the rest of you, if you want to join us with your own photos in the future, all you need to do is to jump to our website, cleverphotographer.com/forward membership. Sign up there, get your monthly photography bundle, get access to the photography show and our Clever Photographer Academy, and start moving your photography forward. That's it for today. My name was Jakub Bors, and I can't wait to see you again in the next episode next week on Tuesday, 6 p.m. UK time, here at Clever Photographer channel or at Clever Photographer Facebook group.